I am here today with Tarek Hassan. We met a few years ago on Twitter and we've been a great connection of each other ever since. Tarek has partnered with companies like Walmart, Southwest Airlines, and he got a personal reply from Steve Jobs himself that they were not interested in mobile internet when he shared the ID. Next to that, he's helping a lot of startups, bigger businesses with sales, and next to authoring 4 books, including 2 children books, he's also been a personal mentor of mine, and I'm super glad you're here today.
Thanks, Lawrence. I'm very glad to be here too. It's always good to connect.
So, what I want to start off first, because when I made the introduction, I talked about Twitter. I named that specifically because that's kind of the platform, the social media where we initially connected. And for me personally, I've been able to connect with so many people there. But I want to ask from your perspective, how is that initial change, let's say, from more of a corporate background, more a professional, formal business structure, to tapping into that online space, like that online business field?
So the corporate environment is a very structured, great environment, I think, to learn. Some people, they really succeed in the corporate environment. Some people, they feel too many restrictions. So the ones who usually feel too many restrictions, I feel, they go off into another space. And that's why I kind of started getting into Twitter, is because I wanted to add value and create a network of people who are up and coming and learning and growing, so that we could all share knowledge with each other. We could all learn from each other. We all had some value to offer each other. Everyone had different value to offer each other. And the biggest thing was that Twitter had a space to where there were so many people globally who were just interested in having their own business and thinking outside the box and growing and living in a positive world of abundance versus scarcity, and figuring out ways to add value and build themselves, their own name and their own brand. So to me, it was a no-brainer. I was telling somebody the other day how tough it was to get started on Twitter, because it's really like, it's not easy, because a lot of people don't know who you are and they won't follow you in the beginning. And so you have to really work hard and stick it out, to actually start gaining some attention for the value that you're offering, and start connecting with the types of people you want to connect with. Just like anything else, it just takes time. And if you just put your head down and commit to it and make it through all the rejections, you eventually grow, which is a great training for starting your own business too.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, and it kind of leads to what I wanted to ask you next, because one of the major pillars I could say that you taught me is really, when it comes to sales, is the value of genuine connections, and especially long-term relationships with clients, and just growing potential business out of long-term relationships. Can you share as well, like, what that mindset behind it is?
Sure. Well, thinking long term leads to success, and I've learned that. I've been in sales for 24 years, and I learned it from the beginning. And so, whenever I started out in sales, I was trying to just connect with people to make sales, and it turned into trying to be quicker transaction type sales. Now, the problem with that is, there's no growth out of it for the future. It could be a short-term advantage or a short-term gain, but what you've done is you've ruined the long-term opportunity, not just for you and that company, but maybe even for your name and your brand. And so, over time, what I learned, and I learned it pretty quickly, within the first couple of years, is if you're not there to serve, and genuinely want to help a customer for their long term, then you probably shouldn't be creating products, building products, selling products, because you're not going to succeed in the long term. So if you're serious about a path, you have to have some sort of long-term mindset. And if you put your name behind a product or a service, you have to think in terms of, how can I help this customer for the long term? And so I can create a long-term relationship with them and add value over the long term. And so if you don't have anything that you could use to meet that, then I would just keep searching for something that you feel is important enough to sell or present to a future partner or customer, that you could have a long-term relationship in.
Yeah, that's so valuable and it's so true too. And I like that you also mentioned the reputation because you're kind of building your reputational capital too. When it comes to just the way you present yourself, if you're always chasing that quick type of interactions, a lot
Yep.
of people don't appreciate that, and that's something I
No.
learned too. And I also really like the fact that you told me a long time ago something in the sense of, I'm not sure if those were the exact words, but you told me something in the lines of people are not stupid or people are not dumb. And a lot of people tend to approach sales with that idea, that mindset that we have this amazing service or product. We know that if we send out this messages and we use this type of framework, we can generate sales. And it kind of gives them some sort of arrogance
Hmm.
where they neglect that actually genuine connections. And that's something I never wanted to really forget because I know that's something you addressed as well. And especially for myself, I see a lot of younger people, younger entrepreneurs like myself, they're chasing these ways to get quick hacks. And an example of that is people tend to see, okay, now I have my service, I have my case studies, I can kind of expand. And they read online or they see a video that you need to find appointment setters who will make the appointments. And then you have a closer who does the calls, and that's boom, you can expand your business. And obviously, that is a critical part of actually growing your business, like a sales department. It's critical. And if you have that in a certain stage, you would have perhaps people who do those closer calls and actually set the appointments. But the failure therein, like the failure in that logic, is that people tend to think, oh, I just need to find one person who does that activity and it will work. And it's so far from the truth. I experience in my own. It's really a matter of finding someone who you put in a system which collaborates with other system, right? Like sales is only one activity. If you're not doing anything else, your whole business doesn't work. And that whole idea of one person who's like this magical salesperson is going to transform everything. I don't think that's very true either. And I know you wrote an article too about explaining that if you hire like commissions only, it's like 95% of the time like a challenge. So is it something you can expand on as well?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So the thing is, this goes back to the long-term mindset. So if you have a company and you want to sell a product or service, you got to think long-term because you want not just a customer to pay you once, you want them to pay you many times. And you don't just want one customer, you want to build a brand that has a great reputation and that's trustworthy so you can gain more customers. And you want this to sustain for many, many years, whether you stay in the business or you sell the business. Even if you sell the business, that person's going to want you to have a long-term mindset for your brand because that's how you create long-term value, right? So the challenge I find with commission-only salespeople is, and I've done sales for a while, um, every once in a while you might find the right commission salesperson, but it's like needle in a haystack, especially if you're selling a software or hardware or service with longer sales cycles. So once the commission only salesperson sees that they're not going to get their commission pretty quickly because you're not paying them hourly or on a retainer or salary, they're probably going to jump to another company or product that they can make that have quicker closings with quicker sales cycles where they can make their money quicker. Because if they're putting in all this effort, they just want to get paid faster. So I find there's not many industries that really fit where people could with a real experience could be happy selling commission only, unless except for maybe automobiles or furniture or food or something that's really necessary for humans to have, right?
Right.
Even though a car is pretty expensive, there's financing, and a part of it is a very emotional buy. So people will buy a car right away, even if they don't think about it too much. Same thing with furniture, right? And food, obviously, it's a necessity, or clothing, like shoes and that sort of thing. A commission-only shoe salesperson could make really great money, especially if he's selling women's shoes, for example, right? Because there's a huge demand,
Mm.
right? But when you're selling software and hardware and services with longer sales cycle, you don't need transaction type salespeople. You need solution oriented salespeople. You need relationship oriented salespeople. And the only people that can sell those types of things are long term thinking salespeople who you need to be there for a long time plant those seeds and cultivate those seeds over 3 to 6 months. Most people that just do commission only, they can't stick around. They got to pay their bills.
Yeah, that's so true. And I guess the best combination is really that combination of having the actual salary or retainer, whatever that could be,
Yeah.
and having that, closing commission as like an incentive. I think that's
Yep.
the most realistic. And as you're saying, like people have to pay their bills too, and obviously, perhaps more young people too. Like there's definitely like an ambition for a lot of people to just fully do it commissions only. And I can
Yes.
definitely see there will be opportunities where you could work for a certain person or you're entering a certain market that just doing that commissions only gives you like a great start, like a great boost of
Yeah.
finding a new path for yourself. But what you're describing is really more from the perspective of somebody who owns a company and is looking to expand their own sales,
Hmm.
which is very interesting. And you have a unique point of view too, because you're helping so many other companies with exactly that. So what I want to ask following up on that is if you're looking at, let's say, somebody who's just starting their business or it's a startup and they have funding and you help them set up their sales, like what is kind of the first actionable steps you do to build their sales department or their sales channels?
Well, I mean, we have an onboarding questionnaire that helps us kind of understand where they've been and where they're what they want, um, where they want to go. On top of that, usually, just because I've been doing this for so long, I can kind of tell what they need pretty quickly by having our first free consultation in 30 minutes or so. Um, but after that, once they decide they want to work with us, we'll have like a kickoff call on the first day that lasts at least an hour. And that way, with the questionnaire, we look at it and we ask them questions based on what's happened in the past, who they've sold to in the past. If they're brand new, they'll tell us that. If they want us to do experimentation and kind of be a reconnaissance team and we go find all this information, we can do that. They'll let us know then. If they've had prior success, they'll tell us where they failed, where they succeeded, what kind of decision makers to reach out to, what the normal sales cycle's like, and what they've used before, any marketing material. And then we'll pop up their sales outreach for them professionally in the United States, even if they're a company in the U.S. or they're somewhere anywhere else in the world. We'll help them grow in the United States, and we'll start creating our own messaging based on our experience. We do use a little bit of AI, but 90% of our messaging is we created ourselves at this point, and we'll create scripts and we'll do cold calling and emailing and LinkedIn and webinars, and we'll even attend events for clients. But basically what we do is we stand it all up, the sales organization for them. We start doing the outreach, and then we start to figure out what kind of messaging is going to work best, what channels are going to work best, where do we double down. We give the client data, what's working and why something's not working, right? Why not? So we give them a bunch of data, and we use all that information to figure out the best path forward for them so we can get them the best results. And we're constantly experimenting, constantly learning, constantly adjusting for our clients.
And it sounds like it's really like a calm journey of the companies you work with, in a sense that you kind of hold their hand in their whole development of sales or expanding. So
Yeah.
I think that's so valuable. And I'm very curious as well as what is like the main benefit you bring for companies outside of the US who are looking to sell in the US, because I know you're doing that a lot too.
Yeah, thank you. So the biggest thing and what we found, a lot of our clients are from overseas. So if you are overseas and you want to tap the largest market in the world, which is the US, of buyers, the largest market of buyers, you have a couple choices. Either you connect with a company like myself, our company, or you find somebody like us, or you actually travel here, spend time and money to find the right people, open an office, hire the right people, and then basically maintain the management of this whole thing from overseas. Now that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money. So basically what we do is we cut that all down to a fraction, and where you get a whole experienced sales team ready to go already in the US who understands the culture, understands how to talk to these prospects, doesn't need an office here in the United States, who we could basically help them save a lot of time and a lot of money, and use our entire sales team to try to get them the best results. And they don't have to worry about the headache of trying to find the right person. If that person not working out, then they have to go find somebody else in the United States, even though they're in another country like France, for example, right? So we can do all that for them here locally, and we can also attend events for them. And we'll give them all the data that they need. We've had some clients, once they've had a positive experience with us, they decide, okay, now I know who to hire and what I need to do in the United States after working with us, because we basically showed them the best path forward for their
Yeah.
company.
You're kind of giving them the jump start, right?
A jumpstart, yeah.
Yeah,
That's where we
exactly.
get the name.
Yeah. No, what I personally notice as well, I've been always operating from Europe, and I do have quite some clients from the US as well. But if I see the comparison of what it does from, US clients to speak to a US based person on a sales conversation versus
Yeah.
myself, being in Europe, like you hear the accent, it's noticeable. It does play a huge role. And it doesn't, like it's not something bad or something at all. It just makes sense. Like it really makes sense. People really tend to be far more comfortable if they know, okay, this is like a company in the US or this person is in the US, versus them, for example, me, like a younger guy here in Europe, selling my services. So I can really see that for companies outside of the US, if they're looking to expand, in that market of the United States, that initial startup help of having like a other party helping them with them is like super valuable.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of companies have seen a lot of value from our work, and having a U.S. local presence, as you said, is very helpful. There's little nuances in the culture in America, and just like there is in different countries, right? And so we basically cut down the sales cycle time by already knowing how to sell and already understanding the culture, just learning their product pretty quickly and being able to put them into our system so that we can get them faster results more successfully.
Right. And something I always believe and something I always talk about is the fact that business is super nuanced. So I like that you brought that up. I really have the philosophy of business that there's not one thing that really works, and you need to have everything in place in order to actually have a business, right? You need to have the sales, the marketing, fulfillment. Without all those different departments, you don't really have a business, and
Yeah.
you definitely cannot grow or actually scale properly. So, what is your take on that fact of like, everything being so nuanced, especially from a sales perspective?
Well, yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, you need different. I like to say it's like hitting on all cylinders, like a car would, right? You can't just, there's no cars that run on one cylinder, right? So you got to hit in every area. And so I think sales is a very significant part of that. I mean, like you said, there's marketing and operations and everything else. Um, when it comes to nuances in sales, I think every industry has its own nuances. So even though you can create the right system to use, like for example in B2B sales, which is our specialty, and we can help any company in any industry really sell their products and find the right customers. But there's always going to be nuances in terms of the industry, how people communicate, what's worked and what hasn't, um, how business is done in those industries, which is completely different from an industry from a different type of industry next to it. So I think nuance. I think you nailed it. I mean, nuance is very important, and you always should be humble and understand that there's always going to be some sort of nuances you haven't learned yet that you could learn to become, better educated on that company that you're working with or that industry you're starting to get into.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's like it kind of goes back to the fact that there's no perfect path. Like there's nothing absolutely fixed.
No,
Everything is flexible.
yes,
Um,
everything's. Oh, it's like my favorite saying is, what the only constant is change.
mm,
And that means everything's going to change all the time. But sometimes nuances they stay the same, but maybe the industry changes, and or maybe some nuances change too. But some things change fast, some things change very slow, right? So
yeah,
you always have to be what is that? Adaptable, right?
yeah, true. Something you have experience in as well is franchising. Is that something you can share about as well?
I mean, I'm not a big fan of franchising. There is some people who are fans of franchising. remember we were talking about the corporate environment.
Mm.
Now, the corporate environment is very structured. Some people really succeed in the corporate environment. Okay? A lot of those people in the corporate environment, they saved up a lot of money. They want to have their own business, but they're not necessarily entrepreneurial in terms of right? So they want something that's already proven, that already has a proven system that they could follow. So it's a natural fit for somebody coming from the corporate environment with this one stipulation, as long as they find the right franchise. The hardest thing to do is to find the right franchise. And the reason I'm not a big fan of it is for two, I like to think outside the box. I'm more creative and that sort of thing. So just like working in corporate environment, working in a franchise for me is restrictive, right? I want to create new ways, new systems, new opportunities, new products and ideas. If you're going to work in a franchise, you need to follow the exact rules that the franchisor sets out for you as the franchisee. So if that fits and you like that structure, it's a great way to have your own business, right? Mm-hmm. The only reason I would be cautious is because there's a lot of franchises out there who don't really have a market, but they're being marketed as there is a market. So you really have to do a due diligence before you put all this money in, because you're going to pay a lot of money to be part of a franchise. And the initial payments are usually between $50,000 and $300,000. And if that company doesn't really have a market, you just lost all your money. So the most important thing to do is, I wrote an article on this actually that was published, is do your due diligence and try to figure out something that you would love to do on a daily basis and see if there's a franchise that already does that. And then do the research on the franchise, see how long it's been around. If the longer it's been around, probably the better. And then I would call and interview at least 15 different franchisees in their system, at least. And make sure there's very successful ones that have had a little bit of success, and ones that have had zero success. And make sure you're talking to all of them and see what patterns emerge and what nuances emerge, and see if this is still of interest to you and you're going to enjoy the daily work of that franchise, and make sure that nobody feels that they're overspending on that franchise and not making any return. So this is the biggest advice I give, because there's a lot of franchises out there that will not make you successful.
That's very valuable input. And I actually did so that the article too. That's a very nice thing. Yeah. What I'd like to talk about as well is that fact that when you're building your own business or operating your own business, sales is obviously like a critical component of it. But it's very easy to fall into the trap of not building a system that actually includes daily tasks, right? Like, it's very easy to just buy a tool, run your automators on LinkedIn, or send out some cold emails, whatever that could be. But that on its own needs to be something you actually do on a daily basis, right? Like, it's so important to have a daily activity, especially if you're managing your own business. You really need to focus on your high leverage activities, which sales could be part of that. But even then in itself, sales, the sales activity of, for example, doing outreach, that on its own is only part of that, right? It's all about the onboarding experience to how you fulfill your service. So it's so interesting that you notice that there's so much noise out there, and there's so much attention-seeking items and things on the social media, everything you see every day. But it's so important to just nail down one channel, identify for yourself as well what that channel is, and just really build your sales from there. And on top of that, from what I noticed is I keep like a CRM of all my clients, and I kind of have the numbers of the X amount of categories they fall in, and I still notice that referrals is like my main thing. It's like one of the second biggest groups. So
nice.
What do you notice there as well? Like, what is your take on referrals versus like direct sales activities?
Well, I mean, I always like to say it's referrals are warm, because when you close a deal, it's hot. And when you don't know the person, it's cold. So if the referrals are warm, so you're already closer to hot than you would be with a cold direct sales approach. And so the more that you could warm up the lead from cold to warmer, the closer you are to hot, which is closed. So I think a referral is very powerful, because you're not trying to sell them. Somebody else is basically vouching for you with their experience with you. And that means probably 5 times more than it does what you're going to tell them, right?
Yep.
Maybe 100 times more, right? Depends on the person. So if you can get referrals, that's the best way to grow. That really is the best way to grow. But I caution, if that's the only way you can grow, then you have to really question your business model. Is it something that really anybody, that there's a big market for? Or are you only growing because of the fact that you're getting referrals? And this goes back to my experience in franchising. My caution is, if your only channel is referrals, you have to be a little bit careful. And I would just try to supplement it with, or complement it with, other channels to make sure that there's a demand for your product and there's some sort of market out there for you. That it's not just a referral-based business.
Right.
But with that said, cold outreach, marketing, webinars, informational products to get interest. If you're gaining interest from the market, obviously people love to hear what you have to offer. They're interested, even if they're not interested at that right time. And referrals is just like the best icing on the cake.
Yep. It's a very well way to put it. And to close it off, I want to ask a bit more of a personal question, which is actually something I believe I never asked you. So I'm curious as to, could you explain like what really inspired you to write the 2 children books you wrote?
Yeah, thank you. That's funny. I'm trying to remember why I did that. Actually, I have 2 daughters. They're 14 and 13 right now. And I remember as I started to grow up, obviously, I always learned all these different lessons. And I always wished, I wish I would have had this lesson early on, but I'm not sure if I would have registered it. So I used to put my 2 daughters to bed every night when they were, I still do it. And so, of course, we did it daily when they were younger too. And they would always want some sort of story. So before they went to bed, because that would relax them and they'd feel good. And then, so I started realizing that I started just creating these stories that that they could connect with characters, whether they're, an animal or some sort of product that was personified, that would basically take them on this little journey and would teach them a valuable lesson at the end. And so it always had a valuable lesson at the end. And I started to realize that then once I did it a couple of times, they kept asking me. So I had to make sure that I was ready to do this every night. And so I probably did this for, I'm not kidding, probably for a solid 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. Almost every night. No, not kidding. And so I started writing some of the ones down that I was saying that really connected with my daughters. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to put them in these 2 books. I put them in one, and then I realized I had more, so then I created the second volume. And I thought this is perfect for certain age groups of kids who want to hear a story before bedtime. They can get a valuable lesson out of it that could probably help them as they're growing.
That's so nice. That's so nice. I appreciate you sharing it too. I think it's a very, personal touch. And it's interesting because it does show your entrepreneurial approach in general, right? It's really bringing out your entrepreneurial self in just like something super personal.
Thank you.
It's very interesting. And with that being said, I really appreciate your time as well. I think we had a super valuable conversation. So for everybody checked it out, thank you for tuning in too. And I wish everybody a great day.
Thanks, Lawrence.